Rama 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 Ramana Rama Ramana Rama Ramana Rama Ramana Rama Ramana Rama Ramana Rama 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 Radha Rama 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 Radha Rama 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 Radha Invocation. Invocation is to actually get into an understanding of what existence is all about. Is there an existence awareness other than existence? Because the existence really exists in the heart, free from thoughts. The existence reality is called the heart. How do we contemplate it? To exist as it exists in the heart is to contemplate it. Thus should you know. This is not a riddle, actually, because when we contemplate on the heart, what are we doing? To put it in an energetic parlance, or we shut our eyes and when we close our eyes without any thought, when we don't want a thought to come in unannounced, you have to say anishcha. When you say anishcha, this particular entity, which we call as an obstruction or an intrusion, will run away. It just literally will take flight. So then you start the contemplation, and every work of teaching needs to begin with an invocation. So we start with an invocation. If the work has to be completed successfully and to be in conformity with pious practice, then this and the next verse are necessary, but they are invocatory. The invocation need not necessarily be in the form of a prayer. It may also be in the mode of remembrance. So in Advaita Vedanta, even the conception of a God is transcended. That does not mean, however, that there is no place for God in Advaita. Shankara, the great exponent of non-dualism of spirit, which is Advaita, has left behind him and soul-moving poems of adoration to the myriad form of the personal deity. Poems that can constitute a grand testimony to the intense devotion of their author. The fact that in the first verse of the invocation of Sri Ramanna teaches the nature of the impersonal absolute, and in the second verse the nature of the personal God, shows at once the place of theism in Advaita and Sri Ramanna's testimony to the Advaita experience. In the first verse, reality is identified as existence awareness. It's described as the heart, and the true contemplation of it is stated to be the realization of one's identity with it. The second verse, reference is made to Maheshwara, the great Lord, who is the ruler even of death and who is sought as refuge by those who are afraid of death, and the way to deathlessness is also indicated. Now, when we get to the invocation, the first proposition is put in the form of a rhetorical question, whose meaning is, other than existence, there is no existence awareness. As we've already said, in its empirical form, judgments we wrongly predicate existence of the objects of experience, whereas the truth is that it's the appearance of existence. Defining reality as that which is constant and abiding in things that change. The Vedanta discovers that existence is reality, Sat and Satya, existence and truth. which are synonyms, which means that they transcend the three paths of time, past, present, and the future. While particular modes of existence are perishing presentations, existence as such is imperishable and absolute. Reality is not mere existence, it's also intelligence or awareness. To consider reality to be simple, objective being would result in skepticism and agnosticism. All forms of materialism and naturalism flounder and fail, because even to state them is required an intelligence which cannot be reduced to a datum of sense. Nor is it true to identify reality with a stream of ideas, for that would lead to subjectivism and solipsism. Reality is neither inert existence nor a subject of sense of presentations. It is Satchit, existence consciousness. Even reality is not existent, but existence. I'll read that again. Even reality is not an existent, but existence. So also is not consciousness of, but consciousness act, or as. In other words, the real is pure existence and pure consciousness. Okay? Sri Ramanna designates the real as the heart because its seat is the heart. The location of the heart in the physical body is the chest. Now 2 digits to the right from the median. A person, when asked for his identity, instinctively points by gesture of hand to the right side of his chest, like this. Now the sage, when he is with bodily awareness, localizes the absolute experience within the heart. In truth, however, the location of the self in the heart is only from the standpoint of body consciousness. The self is the heart in the sense that it's core of one's being, the center of all that is. Even when it's said to be seated in the heart, it is not the heart which is of the stuff of relative experience that is meant, but the heart which is capable and is emptied of all empiric contents, the heart that is pure and free from thought. How is one to contemplate the heart center? It's not an other which can be contemplated by way of ideation. Empirical knowledge, which involves the distinction of subject and object, is not applicable to the distinctionless absolute. I'm going to read this paragraph again, it's important. How is one to contemplate the heart center? It's not an other which can be contemplated by way of ideation. This sentence actually means that normally when we contemplate something, we focus on it and we think it is the other. Now, it is not an ideation, literally means a subject-object. When we have a subject-object, we are actually deviating away from the self. And therefore, when we come down to understand that empirical knowledge, which involves the distinction of subject and object, is not applicable to the distinctionless absolute. So the absolute is without any distinction. It is as it is. One has to know it by being it, or in other words, by realizing one's identity with it. Now we come down to the crux of what we're going to talk about today, in continuation of the first video, which we'll be shortly putting up, so that we can all view it together, right? Okay. When the mind, turning inward, inquires, "Who am I?" and reaches the heart, that which is I sinks crestfallen, and the one reality appears of its own accord as I. Though it appears thus, the I is not an object, it's the whole, that is WHOLE. That verily is the self which is real. The result of self-inquiry is here stated. When there is persistent inquiry into the nature of I, what happens? The pseudo-I vanishes and the real I shines. The purified mind, as was explained, must turn within and direct its light, though borrowed, on itself. Now, the purifying of the mind is when you actually contemplate on the mind. When you contemplate on the mind disappears, because the mind has no status of its own. It is on borrowed ground. On what is it standing? On wisdom and on consciousness. The consciousness itself cradles it, right? Now, the usual way with the mind is so busy itself with the things of the world, like a maddened monkey drunk with the wine of worldliness. It jumps from one object to another, not knowing to rest nor peace, which is the end of its quest. It's often mind is often referred to as a mad monkey, and it's full of chatter. So when you actually start your contemplation within, you oftentimes come into contact with a lot of chattering. This is not the chattering that we normally are in tune with in the material world, but in the world within, this chatter takes in the form of images, it takes in the form of a lot of clutter, which you have to sift through, which you literally have to work yourself through. So that purification, again, as I pointed out earlier, has to be when you contemplate on that mind. So the more you contemplate on the mind, the more it dissolves and vanishes. When that is done, then you actually begin your inquiry, the self. This is known as Atma Vichara. For those of you who are already familiar, you know what Atma Vichara is all about. So we now with Atma Vichara. What is to be done first is to steady the mind. Now, to make it one-pointed, this mind that we are talking about is a purified mind, which is equivalent to the heart. So when we refer to the heart, we also refer to the pure mind, which again is also the pure ego, which is completely bereft of any thoughts, bereft of all senses, bereft of every single entity with which we are associated when outside of the body consciousness. So what is to be done? After doing the steadying the mind, we start with stilling the mind, as taught by Sri Ramanna, is the I inquiry. The question, who am I, of course, rises in the mind. This is not to go on repeating who am I endlessly, but to have it as an intent in the pockets of your frontal lobes in the mind. The frontal lobes are the forehead. So if it is pursued properly, it will take one beyond the mind. Now, when I say properly, it literally means you do it sufficiently long enough to realize the clarity with which everything is discernible within. This is only something that you would know once you start your contemplation. The inquiry, in fact, will lead you to the heart center, which is the seat of reality, the true I. Now, with this heart center which we are talking about is not exactly the heart in the right side of the chest. It is everywhere within the body, everywhere, and outside the body and everywhere else. Here I must add some information. When we talk about the heart and feeling the heart in its completeness, in its Purna Sthiti, we actually will be referring to everything that nature shows us when we encounter a walk in the park, a drive down a highway, or just walking along on the beach. So what the feelings that you experience at that time are completely in consonance or in assonance with what the heart is actually setting the tune with you at that moment of time. So the consciousness completely and totally are in sync. And this synchronicity is what actually measures out in terms of vibrations and frequency. So you come up feeling with tremendous sense of elation and a feeling of sufficiency when you go down to the beach or when you have a walk at the park, especially on a day when after the showers everything is nice and sunny. So thus then the I alone shines. Now what is shining in this particular state of affairs is the pure I, is the real you, which is speaking to you in a language which is pure love. So you radiate love in a vibratory sense. Okay? Here there is no object-subject relation. For the true I is the whole, that is WHOLE. It is Purna, the plenum. It's known as the plenum. Nothing is there before it, nor anything after it. So Purnamada, Purnam idam, Purnata Purnam Uddachyate, Purnasya Purnam Adhaya, Purnam eva Vashishyate. That is the whole, this is the whole from the whole. The whole arises, taking away the whole from the whole. The whole alone remains. I'm now going to do this verse following because that's relevant. For the one having destroyed the ego is awake to the nature of the self, which is bliss. What is there to be accomplished other than the self? He is not aware of anything. How can his state be comprehended? The verse is in point and in praise of the one who has reached the goal, even while remaining a body, the Jivan Mukta. Inquiry, as we saw, results in the disappearance of the pseudo-I and the relaxation of the true I. The pseudo-I is the ego, the subjects in all empirical usage. When its nature is inquired into, it sinks crestfallen because it has no ride to reality, no title to reality. Although it assumes that tide till the discovery is made. Self-discovery therefore spells the destruction of the ego. It's deep sleep. It must be remembered, the ego is not destroyed, but is only resolved in its cause, viz. Ignorance. The destruction of the ego takes place with the onset of knowledge. And when there is self-knowledge, there is release. Release does not await the disintegration of the body, which is called death. The reason being that release is one's eternal state. What obscures is avidya, nescience. When that is removed, the self-nature's freedom stands self-revealed. This is called moksha or release, and prarabdha or awakening from the slumber of ignorance. We'll stop here only to rehearse what we have read, because this particular thing talks about a lot of releases. So we have the release of the ego, we have the release of prarabdha, all which is pointing out that getting rid of ignorance is fundamental to realizing self. So from avidya you go to vidya. Now is that clear to everybody? Right. Now the mukta, the released soul, is the Buddha, the awakened. He is awake to the nature of the self, which is bliss. Release, therefore, is not a condition of emptiness, nor mere absence of sorrow. It is of the nature of unexcellable bliss, the highest value. This is so because moksha is the self. He who gains the self attains the plenitude of happiness. There is nothing more that he should accomplish, for he has accomplished all that has to be accomplished. He is kritakritya. So if there were anything other than the self, he might want to accomplish it. Since there is nothing beside the self, what is there to be accomplished by him? We pause here. The mukta or the Buddha is what we are in the present state. Everyone, each and every one of us is an awakened soul. If we find that we are not awakened, and if we feel that there is some kind of an emptiness or some kind of a vacuity, all that is being pointed out has to be annihilated, which means you'll have to remove it. Now the removal process does not mean that you take a brush or you take something liquid and pour it into yourself. No. It has to be done through energy. And when you do it with energy, all you have to do is to repeat the word anishcha, which means impermanent. If it is an entity, if it is not an entity, but it is something that is coming in bhava, which means as an expression, as a emotion, which you cannot rub away easily. How do you manage to take this off? Now, if it is an emotion and you have to work it out, you have to get into music, you have to get into poetry, you have to get into any kind of a creative talent which will take you away from the sorrow that an emotion brings. The moment you do it with a lot of intent and a lot of happiness within you, which is already there by the way, you are happiness, you are love, you are everything you seek. That is the real and absolute self. Having said that, is that clear as to what this particular paragraph means? Now, even to refer to the mukta as an individual is not quite correct. He is not an individual among individuals. He is not a he. The difficulty of all speech is that it cannot express what transcends all limitations. In moksha, there is not even a trace of limitedness. To talk of the one that is released is only a concession to the weakness inherent in language. The plenary experience that is the self is all that there is. But there are yet within the confines of avidya may point out to a person and say, he has attained release, he has become perfect. But from the standpoint of the perfect, or rather the perfection, there is no attainment, no becoming. There is no awareness there of anything other than the self. The self is awareness. How can it be comprehended? For all comprehension involves duality. Okay, now we come down to a question answers, and we also find out if nothing has to be comprehended and we are already awareness, why then all this inquiry, why this Atma-vichara, and where is the necessity for us to go into getting inspired? What for? Now these are the very pertinent questions because we are in an age which requires us to let go of all that has been misunderstood, mistaken, and misappropriated. Now, with a plethora of the laity or the plethora of denizens across the so-called humanity. I say so-called humanity because it's the one in the many that we see. This has been stated by people like Vivekananda and many other sages who have made it very clear that the one is always present without a second. But how do we see the many? We see the many because each and every one of the many is but an expression of purification. This purification is because of the fundamental resting that all entities take on prarabdha. Now, prarabdha is literally a state where it is allotted to purify existence. We get on to very deep matters over here, because the presence of a omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent entity whom we call God or Deva, Devi, is something which is felt. They do not appear or disappear. They are always there. Now, this particular truth will only be made clear when we do our contemplation and meditation. Now, contemplation and meditation are states when we actually focus in our silent moments, when we actually focus and dwell on the absence of an object or an absence of a presence. Now, when I say absence of an object or an absence of a presence, I literally am pointing to the fact that there is only a cognition of these when we are actually aware of our physical body consciousness. Body consciousness is only a state of apparent perception. It is not real. Therefore, any conjecture on this will be actually meaningless, but will go down to be understood as resolving the final clarity of the reality, of the self. You don't stop to being the self at any point of time, but it is the self which seeks to clear the air, as it were, to make you understand that you are a co-creator, a participant in the purity consciousness which is ongoing at this particular point of time as we are speaking. And this is something that is going to make the whole of the world, the earth, the galaxies, the metaverses, recognize and purify the earth of all the ills that it has been subjected to. This information that I'm giving you has been understood and given to us by galactical brothers and sisters from the Pleiades and from other galaxies like Sirius, and they actually have in one voice brought into cognition the fact that we are not alone in this universe, we are not alone in this cosmic world. We have our focus to be co-creators with them, and it's important, and that is what made the whole inspiration to get further into understanding who am I. And we come back to know that this assumes tremendous significance, because an authentic self is one who excels, who succeeds, who is par excellence in his work. And if you want to make any kind of a progress towards awakening and to bring a furtherance of what we have all talked about in this particular episode, is wherever you are in society, in any job that you do, you can bring this into complete prominence by adopting and adopting everything that it talks about. In precept, but not in writing. You don't bring it into play loudly in every place where you are doing something, but you bring it in the work that you produce. You bring it in the results that you present. So if you are a person who's actually you're a CEO of a particular firm, right? what you do in your planning, what you do in your execution, what you do in various departments is to elicit and bring out those elements which are going to highlight and bring clarity, unity, and a sacred divinity, which is the ongoing effort of every single CEO and what he's actually set out to achieve. So therefore, we have to make this a very, very fruitful endeavor on our part to bring this in play wherever we are, each and every one of us. In my Facebook, I have actually called us the fractals in the kingdom of the Lord. Now, this is exactly what Jesus talks about when he says, forgive them for they know not what they are doing. We have a lot of people who have been under the fallen impressions and fallen dogmas, and they hasten to be ready for rectifying it, but they never find the ready answers. So the answers will come about with who am I. My whole quest and my whole endeavor in presenting this with energy, with parallels from real life as we understand it, which is neither real nor is it life, for the actual jiva doesn't exist. We don't live. We don't live according to the definitions which we have ascribed in the language. And these are the limitations that language imposes on us. So when we are silent and we are with the language of love, which is the expression of the consciousness, we manage to unravel and understand that a presence speaks much louder, much more clearer when matters of the heart, matters of what you intend, and matters of where you want to go with what you have to reach out for the betterment of the soul whom you are addressing. Thank you. Shanti, Shanti.